Hi, my name is Melinda Brooks. I am the Specialized Dockets Manager for Franklin County Municipal Court in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm serving as your NACM host for this webinar entitled Real World Success in Analyzing E-Filing Data. And our guests today are Sharina Gilliland, who is with Parker County District, or she is the Parker County District Clerk. And she was named the County and District Clerks Association of Texas District Clerk of the Year in 2022. She's been involved in CDCAT as a regional director, serving on many committees, and currently is the district clerk co-chair of the legislative committee. So welcome, Sharina. Our next speaker will be Caitlin Reddy, who's the acting statewide manager for eCourts in Massachusetts Trial Court. She manages a portfolio of projects and initiatives focusing on the implementation of new technology to make the state court system more efficient, digital, and accessible. And then our talk today is going to be moderated by Stevie Poole, she's a key contributor at Tyler Technologies, has been there for 8 years as a product manager for Justice Insights, and she's going to guide our discussion as we move through this presentation. And at the end, I'll share some information about NACM as an association, and we welcome those who are both members, and thank you for coming, and also welcome those who are not members of our association. So Stevie, why don't you take it over from here, and then at the end, I'll share some information about NACM.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction. And just to clarify, everyone can see my PowerPoint screen?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, and then if you don't mind, would you go ahead and launch our first poll? Because now that you know why Caitlin, Sharina, and I are all here, we'd really like to understand why you're here today. So we're going to launch a poll that's going to ask you what brought you to today's presentation. And as that poll runs, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us. I'm very excited to share some of the success that these ladies have seen in their jurisdictions, as well as kind of what we've seen across the country. So I'm not sure if that poll has launched. It's a little bit difficult for me to tell. Okay, great. I think we can probably close the poll and go back to my presentation.
Would you like to share the results for you, Stevie?
Yes, please. And I'm not sure that I can see them. If anybody wants to read them out.
Sure, I can for you. So 57% said they were here to check out what's new. 2% said they're looking to purchase a solution like this. 42% said they're here to develop product knowledge. And 11% said they're here for something else.
Okay, fantastic. Well, for the 2% of you looking to buy something, this is not going to be a sales presentation, but if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me after the fact. Okay, well, with that in mind, thank you so much. I am going to just dive into our presentation. So before we really get started in our questions and kind of our panel questions, I want to take a moment to set the stage because both Sharina and Caitlin are using Tyler's eFile Analytics dashboard. And again, I'm not going to focus a ton on this tool, but I do want to give some context around how they're accessing the data points we're going to be talking about today. So For example, this is a screenshot of the tool they're using. What I want to highlight here is that they aren't using those tabular static reports that are typically provided by your e-filing manager. I'm not familiar with everything that's out in the market, but for example, if you use Tyler's eFile and Serve, that might look something like the reviewer ops report. Instead, the data that they are looking at is up to date. It's refreshed every 24 hours. And the data is what we call dynamic. That means it's updated as new information becomes available. Maybe a filing that was pending is now accepted, or maybe the rejection reason for a filing from last week has been changed. All of that's going to be updated and reflected in this dashboard without having to re-download any type of report. I think it's also important to give you an idea of what data they're looking at in this tool. So what's included is a real-time and historical view of all filings, envelopes, and individual documents, the status of each filing, so whether accepted or rejected, processing times for each filing showing how long it took to reach either acceptance or rejection, filterable rejection reasons to track trends and identify common issues, reviewer productivity metrics detailing how long it takes each reviewer to complete the processing of an envelope, all the way from start to finish. And then I also want to point out that we're measuring processing time from the moment a filing is submitted until it's either accepted or rejected. So what we hope is that this will give us a clear picture of the true processing time that's felt by the filer, which may differ from other reports that you're used to seeing. Also, we automatically exclude weekends from this calculation. So if a document, for example, is filed at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, the clock won't start ticking until 8 a.m. on Monday. So now with that in mind, I want you to think about how your court is currently tracking e-file data. And we're going to have another poll question. So what I want to know here, if Melinda wouldn't mind launching this poll question, how is your court currently tracking e-filing data? So some of the ways that I've heard of this happening might be an internal BI tool, Excel spreadsheets, reports from the e-filing manager, or it's just not, you're just not tracking it. It's very difficult to extract this data in a meaningful way. And so you're currently not tracking it. And while you're answering, I'll say, go ahead. I'm sorry, I think Melinda unmuted.
No, I was just going to say that we're rolling and we now have about 114 people participating. So I'll give it a second to see if we can get pretty close to that amount of people before we report out on results.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. While you're selecting your options, I just want to share that I've also heard, and I think this might resonate with a few of you, there's usually one person in the office that's kind of responsible for tracking data and keeping track of it. It might be the person who's sitting in this webinar, it might be you, or it might be someone you know very well. It's like there's Bob down the hall, and Bob keeps track of all of this data, and if I have a question, I ask Bob. So that's not an option in this poll, but that's another answer that I hear very often when we're discussing how courts are currently tracking data.
All right, well, I think we've got our results. We have about 12% saying that they're using an internal BI tool. About 24% are using Excel spreadsheets. About 27% say they are selected reports from my e-filing manager. And 49%, or about half, are saying that they're not currently tracking e-filing data.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think that represents probably a broader view of our courts around the country. Because again, it's historically been difficult to visualize and use e-filing data in a way that's meaningful and is going to drive change within your organization. But I think what we're going to find today is that there is a lot of success in leveraging this information. So with that, let's get to know our panelists and their jurisdictions just a little bit better. So as was mentioned earlier, Sharina is the district clerk of Parker County. Parker County has a population of 173,000 and is growing. It's currently ranked the number 31 of 254 Texas counties in terms of population. The county's court system is made up of 2 district courts and 2 county courts at laws. In Sharina's office, 17 employees serve the very busy district courts, and her office is also the jury administrator and passport acceptance facility for the entire county. So the courts are general jurisdiction courts for civil, family, felony, and juvenile cases. Last year, there were approximately 3,800 new cases filed in Parker County. So thank you so much for joining us today. And first, I just want to understand what had you start tracking e-filing data? Can you give us a quick overview of why you started tracking this information?
I forgot I was muted. There we go. At first, it was just out of curiosity of what's available, what's being tracked. And then it was trying to compare what we're doing versus what the state of Texas expects. And so it was just kind of at first just looking at what's happening and then how are we looking compared to what the state is doing as a whole. And then after I kind of got my head around what are our options here to look at, then I started digging down deeper into what is our office doing in terms of how quickly are we accepting or rejecting these envelopes, and if we're rejecting, why are we rejecting, and to try to start tracking some of those individual reasons for what was happening in our office.
Interesting, interesting. That I think that's kind of the progression we've seen in a lot of courts, and I'm really glad to know that it's bringing you value and you're able to understand kind of some of these trends. Okay, so now Caitlin is the acting statewide manager for eCourts for the Massachusetts Trial Court. The Massachusetts Trial Court is a unified state court system comprised of over 6,000 employees. There are 7 departments, including the Boston Municipal Court, the District Court, the Housing Court, the Juvenile Court, the Land Court, the Probate and Family Court, and the Superior Court. Because this is a unified system, most decisions related to policy and changes have to be somewhat agreed upon by 7 large court departments, each with their own chief justice and own court administrator, who all have very different jurisdictions and very different needs. In fiscal year 2024, the Massachusetts Trial Court received approximately 779,000 new filings, and this is with e-filing being permissive and not mandatory in most departments. So, Caitlin, that is a lot of e-filings for not being a strict requirement. Can you tell me a little bit more about the requirements in terms of e-filing? Is it mandatory in some cases, and how long has it been this way?
Sure. Thanks, Stevie. And just to clarify, that total figure of almost 800,000 is our across the board filings. So of that, there's a percentage which is e-filed. We have different mechanisms where e-filing can come in. We use Tyler as well as some interfaces with other state agencies, and law enforcement agencies also file criminal cases electronically almost across the board. That's a requirement for law enforcement. For civil e-filing or non-criminal e-filing, our courts with their varying jurisdictions, as you mentioned, some have mandatory e-filing. In Massachusetts, when we say mandatory, that means mandatory for attorney filers only. We do not have mandatory requirements for self-represented filers. Although, as I talk a little bit more about these numbers, you'll hear that even where it's not required for self-represented filers, they do tend to opt in and e-file when it's available. So 2 of our departments have mandatory e-filing for certain case types. The first is our land court. Land court is a court that has a primary sort of involvement of attorney filers. There aren't a ton of self-represented filers in the land court, and 2 of those case types are mandatory. I'm sorry, actually 4 in land court are mandatory. Those started over the last 2 years. So in 2023, we had 2 case types become mandatory, and then in 2024, we had 2 more. Where cases can be e-filed, 99% of those are e-filed in the land court. So again, that's not all attorney filers, but it does show that the majority of people who file in land court choose to do so electronically. In our housing court, which is a bigger jurisdiction and a little bit broader across the state, there are 2 different case types which are mandatory. in 2020, we went mandatory for attorney filers in our summary process case type. That's what we call evictions in the state of Massachusetts. And in 2024, we went live with our civil cases being mandatory. Of cases which can be e-filed, housing court sits at around 95%. Housing court has a really high population of self-represented litigants. So again, that really demonstrates that where e-filing is available, folks are choosing to take advantage of it. All other departments in the trial court are permissive, and we are working towards becoming more mandatory. I think that's the path we're going to. But because we are such a large court system, we need to make sure that our infrastructure and hardware within our various courts can support such a large change and a large volume that would come in through e-file and make its way into our case management system.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. And so it seems like you've got a lot of data around who is filing, but why did you begin tracking this data in general?
Yeah. So over the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years, the trial court has really been leaning more into modernization. With that, there is an expectation from leadership that data is available to help them in their decision-making processes. So leadership has really set the task for the information technology department, which is where my role and my team sits, to become more modern and more digital. And one of the measures that we use to kind of look at that is the percentage of e-filed cases, both of what's available to be e-filed and what's our total sort of proportion of cases which come in electronically. The e-filing data has really helped in measuring that, and it's given us insight and granularity in the data that we previously didn't have available to us. Our ability to really see the breakdown between initial filings, subsequent filings, and then the total number of documents that get filed in an envelope or sort of across a particular filing has been really eye-opening, and that helps us understand the complexity of what our field is working with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, one more question, one more poll question, and this is out of curiosity for our audience. Is e-filing mandatory in your jurisdiction? So if Melinda could launch that poll.
Okay, I think we have, nope, a few more trickling in. Are you able to see it this time?
I am not. I
Okay.
do see a beautiful rose background though.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I thought I'd try it. I wasn't sure if others were seeing it since I wasn't actively sharing. I apologize. Okay, so do you want me to share the results?
Yes, please.
So 21% answered the question yes, 21% said not at all, and 61% said not completely. It depends.
Okay. Again, I think that's pretty representative of what we're seeing across the country as well. So thank you for sharing that information. I think that'll also help to guide our discussion today. So let's dig in. Okay, so let's just start from the very, very beginning. When you first began tracking data, what metrics did you focus on first and why?
I'll jump in there. The first thing we started focusing on were rejection rates and rejection reasons. When Texas first launched e-filing and it was mandatory for attorneys to e-file, one of the biggest complaints across the state were the rejections and the reasons. And so we wanted to make sure that we were rejecting filings for the proper reasons and not something that we could easily fix and go ahead and accept it and fix it on our end. So that was the first thing that we started tracking, is to make sure that the rejections were proper and that we could easily explain it to the attorneys, and to make sure that we weren't, we just didn't like the way they filed it or the way they worded something, that it was more of a preference reason to be rejecting. So I was able to look at our office as a whole and individuals in our office to see what their rejection reasons were with regards to each envelope.
That's really interesting. Did you see any type of business process change related to that? I think what I've seen often when we first see a court start using e-file analytics is that there is this catch-all rejected option in when they're doing it, and that's what is used most
Yes.
often. Was that the case in your jurisdiction?
Yes, and we were able to do some additional training within our office specific to e-file and how we can accept those envelopes and when they come into our case management system. So even if it's a little messy, or if we didn't like the particular code that was used, is it still enough to get it into the right case and into the right type of filing that we could go in behind and do some cleanup work on our end? And we found that it made attorneys a lot happier because they chose the wrong motion code or something that really didn't have an impact on the case one way or the other. And so that we were able to go in and clean it up, make it more the way that makes more sense to our courts and our judges when they're looking at the case. But trying to kind of offer some customer service out there, that if it doesn't really make a difference in terms of the reporting requirements or how that falls into our particular case, if we can clean it up, then we can go ahead and accept it and make our case look the way we want to, and everybody's happier at the end. So that we did have a lot of extra training within our office of how to find ways to accept that filing instead of just an automatic rejection because it didn't quite look right.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really great that the data helped you to find a way to create a more effective and better customer service for your attorney community. Caitlin, what about you?
Yeah. So in the trial court, we've really let the team that I work with, the eCourts business analysts, and sometimes you'll hear me call them EBAs. That's just something that rolls off the tongue a little bit easier than that long eCourts business analyst title. We have 1 to 2 of those in each of our 7 court departments, and they are really the folks who we have deployed that to, and we just let them get in and start to look at the data and then use that as they and their departmental leadership sees fit, always with kind of me and a couple of other folks at the IT level as backups for them. And I know that across the board, we've really focused on the breakdown of the initial, subsequent, and document count in each of the jurisdictions. That's been very helpful, as well as the envelope processing time, which we sort of help use to guide our staffing and our training, how we train folks when they get hired. We've also used the rejection reason, or some of our lack of use of specifics in the rejection reason, kind of to shape some policy decisions that are coming related to e-filing best practices. Our departments each have sort of their own standing orders that relate to that, but we do really think that based on some of the data that we're seeing, it's going to be better if we come up with something that's a little bit more across the board, less specific to jurisdictions, and more general about how things are submitted, so that when things are rejected, or if they are rejected, there's a bit of policy behind that we can kind of stand up when we need to.
Oh, that's really great. I'm glad to see it's helping to drive decisions. And I really love that you're using this to empower your staff. I think very often, especially in the early stages of launching a data program, we see that there's not a ton of confidence in the data, and there's a lot of context that needs to be included. So we find that data just kind of sits at the top and is not disseminated among the different departments or different staff members, because there's just so much work involved in making sure it's being contextualized in the proper way. So I love to see that this is something that you're able to confidently share across your jurisdiction, so that everyone has insight into the data.
Yeah, and those roles, the EBAs, they are truly the subject matter experts within their departments on e-file. That team is the team that supports and maintains the e-filing system across their department. So they know the ins and outs of it certainly better than I ever will. And honestly, they are a great sort of conduit between their departmental needs and the technology. So there's really no one better in our system to look at that data and be able to provide context to it, which is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Hey, Stevie?
So, speaking of resources and our staff, has visibility into individual processing times influenced how you allocate staff within your office?
I can go ahead and start on this one. My
Sure.
answer might be very different than Sharina, but it may kind of hit with some of the folks on the call. So in Massachusetts, we're really careful with this metric and this tile because we employ a predominantly union workforce. And that means that we have a lot of rules and requirements around how we monitor performance and how we communicate that to our field staff. So we use it in a very general sense, but it's been a really great tool to use broadly to demonstrate where change management is needed. And I think that that's something that comes hand in hand with modernization and with using data to really drive decisions. So when we analyzed that at a sort of overall level and at a high department level, we noticed certain trends in how long things were taking and what that coincided with the start of a business day, the end of a business day. It wasn't necessarily within a lot of our field's general practice to have that queue open and being reviewed consistently throughout the day. So we were able to look at that data and then sort of foster conversations within various departments to think about how we were training people and how we were shaping the way people think about the review queue and how frequently they should be going in to check it, as opposed to the counter. You would never let someone stand at the counter for 4 hours to file something. So how do we incorporate that into the practice of reviewing e-filings?
Oh, that's fantastic. And I assume just based on that, you've seen an increase in that processing time?
Yeah, well, I guess a decrease in the processing time
Oh, right.
overall. Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Increase in effectiveness or
Yes,
speed.
exactly.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now there is definitely a different work environment in Texas. Sharina,
Yes.
what have you seen here?
Well, in Texas, we're very decentralized. So each county is its own little island. And within that county, the clerks are independently elected and run their offices, the same with the judges. And so ours is a much more individualized look at the data. In our office, with respect to processing times, we've been able to use it more of a teaching and or allocating who's doing what within the office. So an example, we had some complaints from employees saying this other person isn't doing as much or they take too long. And we're able to use that data and compare it with other reports, for example, from our CMS system or from the e-file manager itself, and kind of compare those so that, is it really this person's not processing things quick enough? They're not really carrying their weight. Well, what it turned out is this person was actually grabbing some of the more complicated filings and that had a lot of follow-up questions, or they needed to reach out to the filer to ask some more questions. And so it kind of helped with morale a little bit to say, hey, this person is not slacking. Instead, they're taking some of the more complicated envelopes and the filings, whereas everyone else is kind of continuing with just kind of your normal average type of envelopes. And so it helped to be able to say, hey, a more seasoned clerk needs to be working on these type of filings versus everyone else. And it also helped with morale to know we looked at the data and from several different places, and it's not a matter of somebody slacking off. Instead, they're actually carrying a heavier, complicated load.
Yeah, what great insight to gather from that. I don't think that's something that we historically have been able to capture. It's always been this gut feeling of,
yeah,
it's taking them a long time. So what a great way to use data to shift perspectives across the office. Have you used e-filing data to guide decisions around employee resources in general? I know you mentioned more seasoned clerks looking at complicated, but have you noticed an increase in filings, maybe prompting you to maybe consider hiring additional staff or reallocating team members?
Yes, exactly that. This last budgetary cycle in the county, we were able to get approved for additional employees. And one of the data points that we used came from e-file analytics to show over a certain period of time. For example, our criminal e-filings were increasing at a higher rate than our civil and family filings. And so we were able to make the argument with some data to support it that we needed additional people to help with those type of filings. So we didn't just rely on the e-file analytics. That was one of the biggest data points, but we were able to use some data from other sources to kind of supplement that and have multiple data points to show our commissioners court why we had justification for needing an additional employee. And I think it really helped to have numbers and figures. Statistics always help instead of just, well, we feel like we're getting busier and we feel like we need more staff. And so that helped them make that financial decision because we had those numbers to support it.
Oh, that's really great. And that makes sense considering the growth that your
Yes.
area is seeing right now. Caitlin, what about you?
Yeah, so in a much less official way, we've used this. Every month I present to court leadership from across departments, and every month I give them a slide that shows their proportional breakdown of new filings versus filings which come in electronically. And that's always a very big surprise to them. I think when you're kind of removed from the day-to-day a little bit, you maybe don't know how much is coming in still over the counter as compared to e-filing. So we currently sit across the trial court in all of our departments at about 60 to 70% of cases which can be electronically filed are electronically filed. So what I've sort of asked leadership to do is think about this when they're creating training plans and when they're hiring, making sure that this is something that the new hires are supporting, that they're being trained on, and that we're not just focusing on the manual processing of cases, because that is no longer the majority. And I think that change has really happened kind of at a really steady rate over the last 4 to 5 years. We've seen great increases in the number of cases being e-filed. And I think it's taking a little bit of time to catch up on that when we think about staffing and training. But I know that leadership is thinking about it, and I know that that's getting pushed down to individual clerks and registers offices across Massachusetts.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Hey, Stevie, we have a few questions popping up in the Q&A window. Do you want to hold those till the end, or are you able to see them?
Let's hold them only because it is difficult for me to navigate screens, but we'll hold questions till the end, but please continue to post them. We would love to give you more context.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So Sharina, you mentioned already some of the ways that e-filing data has influenced your court's interactions with the attorney community. Do you want to talk any more about that?
Sure. We've had some different meetings with our local bar association and just visiting with attorneys in general. It's helped when you get complaints to be able to have a good answer other than just, well, we're sorry that that happened. And so if we do get any kind of complaints or somebody mentions a specific trend, I'm able to go in and look at, it's usually on the rejections. That's usually where the complaints come in. To go in and look at those rejection reasons and look at that particular filer of what's going on. Why are we rejecting their filings? And it's allowed us to better communicate what we need from our local attorneys when they're filing, and even in choosing their codes or how they're uploading everything. How can they help us? And then we've also used that as an opportunity to communicate with them. And we've found that they like it when we're rejecting a filing in the comments to put specifically what we want. Use this code or add this fee. or don't do it this way. And it helps them and their staff when they get ready to resubmit it. How do they get it accepted the second time instead of trying 3, 4, 5 times? So it's allowed us to have a discussion that's more than just we'll try harder or clerks to do better. It's allowed us to have some specific things to talk about of what we're seeing coming from the attorney filers.
Oh, fantastic. That's really great to hear. Caitlin?
Yeah. So we've used the analytics tool a lot to troubleshoot certain issues with specific filers. So it hasn't necessarily helped set clearer expectations, but we've been able to better engage and solution certain issues with the help of the analytics tool. And one of the biggest benefits that we found is being able to isolate certain filers and document types that are coming in through the e-filing system. If we would attempt to do that in our case management system or through our data mart, which is sort of where we get sort of older data, it would take a really long time. And being able to use the analytics tool quickly to drill down and kind of isolate certain filers, it helped us resolve an issue that, just as a small example, we thought was very widespread on one document type. But when we dug in a little bit more to the data, we found it was one law firm, one filer, and it was a specific setting that they had on the document that they were submitting, and it was creating problems. And the ability to quickly drill down really allowed us to engage in solution with that filer within that law firm very quickly. And when we're able to do that, it just bolsters the trust in the trial court and our ability to use technology. And I think that that overall creates a better relationship with the bar, and a little bit more trust in the system that we can help them when we need to. So that's just one example, but we use analytics to help troubleshoot a lot. And that's been really, really great.
Oh, that's interesting. And I think it goes to show that we have these gut feelings, right? I feel like this document type is an issue, and so I'm going to tell every attorney who will listen to me about this issue. But when you can see it on a dashboard and understand that it's actually just one person, it allows you to much more effectively communicate that problem and resolve it across the board. And I really love that that is something that your court is able to do. Another thing that I've heard from other courts using this is there's also this misconception kind of in the same idea of how long it takes them to process documents. So in one court that implemented this tool, they mentioned that they were new at e-filing, and attorneys were very hesitant to actually take advantage of e-filing. They liked being able to go in and talk to someone. And so there were a lot of complaints about the processing time. So when they implemented this tool, they expected to have just really abysmal processing times. But when they got in there, what they found is they were actually very, very efficient. And so they were able to create a dashboard that they could share with the Bar Association and the attorney community that would help them understand how long they could expect processing times for envelope based on not only complexity, so the number of documents included, but also the time of year. Because with that historical data, they could look and say, if you're filing a complex envelope during the end of December, your processing time is going to be longer than if you're filing it in April. So it's really interesting data points that you're able to elevate, all things that you have these gut feelings about, but that you're really able to validate or invalidate, to Caitlin's point. Another question about that, in terms of justice partners, Caitlin, you kind of alluded to this earlier as well as your relationship with these self-represented litigants. So in what ways has e-filing data supported your court's relationship with legal aid and pro bono organizations?
Yeah, so the trial court has long struggled with the ability to identify self-represented file documents because we have, attorney for a day, we have limited appearance representation, and that's really been tough for us to track historically. But being able to see the breakdown of self-represented filers and the documents that they're filing has allowed us to really make informed decisions when it comes to some of our access to justice initiatives, One of those is our large focus on guided interviews. So that's kind of like a TurboTax tool for electronic filing. And we've really been able to create a great backlog of either forms or packages of forms that we want to focus on based on some of the data that we've been able to analyze out of the analytics that we've received. And I know that that will only help increase access and make for a better filer experience. And it will also, we're hoping, decrease rejection, because those more difficult forms that are more likely to be filed by self-represented litigants are those which probably get rejected at a higher rate. And by making a guided interview to support those filers, we'll likely see a decrease in rejection, and then an increase, of course, in positive feelings, more acceptance, and it will be easier for the clerk's office because they won't have to field questions related to those complex forms and packages that folks are filing.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend we've seen. It absolutely helps. And just to be clear for everyone on the call, I am confident that everyone is familiar with the term self-represented litigant, but it's something that is used differently in different areas. So just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, this is the same thing as a pro se litigant. Really anyone who is filing without an attorney is this catch-all term that we're using. So I am curious though, if we can launch another poll. This is the one I'm most interested in. It's kind of a fun one. So what data points would you most like to have at your fingertips when talking to the attorney community? So again, I can't see if this is launched. So if, Caitlin, your face is on my screen, if you can nod, if this is launched.
Yes,
Okay,
it has.
great. Okay. So some of the answers I've heard in the past are the average time it takes to process an envelope, the top 20 reasons filings are rejected, the most popular days and times for e-filing. And sometimes for some clerks, they really want to have the specific list of returned or corrected filings for each attorney when they're talking to them, so that if they come in with a complaint, they may or may not have their own list of complaints about their filing methods.
All right, Stevie, the poll is rolling.
Okay.
Got about just over half of folks plugged in their response. Give it another few seconds. All right, the flow is slowing down here. We've got about 80 people chiming in.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. The average time it takes to process an envelope received 36% of responses. Top 20 reasons for rejections was 69%. The most popular days and times received 19% of the responses. And then the number of returned or corrected filings for each item, 44%.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I think when we're talking to the community, the attorney community, we really want to be able to help them file more efficiently. And we don't want to reject their filings because it causes more time for our staff members and it causes frustration for them. So having that knowledge at your fingertips is really going to help streamline the conversation with the attorney community. So thank you for chiming in on that. Okay, so this is the final area or topic that I want to focus on. And so I'm just going to ask kind of broadly, can you share trends or patterns that you've been able to spot through e-filing analytics? And how did those insights shape decisions for your court?
Well, Stevie, you kind of alluded to it, of that we just have that gut feeling of when certain things are happening or certain trends. And we've been able to use it to spot some trends, particularly in the family filings. And we always had this gut feeling that it was the Friday before a long holiday, that at 4 o'clock to 4:30, that we were getting hit with lots of emergency filings and lots of protective orders and things of that nature. And so we were able to use eFile Analytics to drill down and essentially confirm what we were feeling, but it also lets us know that as we look at the calendar, when we see those Friday before big holidays, that we know that we need to have enough staff that can handle those particular types of filings and make sure that we have enough court support to know that we can tell the judges and their staff, these filings are coming, so be ready. It's the end of the day, and we've got to be able to handle those because they're emergency or high priority to those filers.
Absolutely. That is such valuable insight because those truly are time sensitive. So what great data points to make sure everyone is bought in on maybe having to stay a little bit late before a long weekend. Caitlin?
Yeah, so I obviously gave the previous example of processing times and sort of the trends that we captured within that. So I won't go over all of that again, but just another point that we've kind of used this data is really just to have good discussions and better understand the different jurisdictions in each of our departments. And those conversations really help guide me when I have to have conversations with leadership about the data and the trends that we're seeing. I like to, it's probably very nerdy, but I do like to go through the tiles when I have some downtime and just kind of dig in and look for anomalies and patterns and weird things. It's something I enjoy doing. And I think that it helps me get to know even more about some of the departments that I am less familiar with. So even when those trends can't be explained, they usually foster good conversations. We had one example where it's a smaller department. It's a department that's got a lot of cases which come in through e-filing. So they're very well trained and well versed in how to do that. And what I noticed is that they had a really high number of one specific case type that was under review. And I reached out to my analyst. I said, what's going on here? This number just doesn't track with how you typically process. And he let me know that for that specific case type, it's kind of a weird one-off. It has a kind of a long pending time, and there's research that goes into it, and there's a long sort of time frame for a decision to be made on a filing. And so now when I look at that, I just checked it the other day to make sure that it was still true. It's still true. There's a really high number of those cases under review, but I know that it's not something that should concern me. And that way, if leadership asks me a question about it, I can say, here's why it's not a cause for concern. Like, you can put that sort of at the lowest level of your priority list when you're looking at data. So I think, again, some of that just helps build trust and build confidence in data and how we analyze data in a large organization like the trial court.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I love that you have those talking points when you inevitably do get those questions. Sharina, you've talked about some of the trends, but and some of the policies that have come around it. But I'm wondering, have analytics provided insights that have generally influenced courts' policies, specifically those related to filing requirements or case processing? And then how do you measure the impact of these policies?
It's a great question. In Texas, the Supreme Court has approved certain codes to use in e-filing. So whether that's your case types, your motion types, document types, those are all pre-approved by the Supreme Court. When you get down to each clerk's office, we choose which ones and map those to our CMS that make the most sense. When we first started doing e-filing, we had tons of options, and we found that it was leading to a lot of rejections because what attorneys thought they might be choosing did not necessarily map to what we were using that code for in our office. So we were able to use e-file analytics to kind of figure out where some of the acceptance and rejection rates seemed off and kind of narrow down our options. And so we actually have a much more scaled down menu to choose from for our filers when it comes to case types and filing types. And maybe they're a little bit more broad. And like I mentioned earlier, once we get it into our CMS, we clean it up to be more specific to our needs. But it's kind of made everybody happier when they're filing and they know, yes, I'm choosing a broad category here, but it's going to get approved. Because that's really where we hear the biggest complaints is in the rejections and why, and now I have to do it over again. So by limiting the choices and making them a little bit more broad in what's offered to the filer, we're able to accept it and get it into our case and make everybody happy. So that's probably the biggest way that we've used eFile analytics, is to look and see where are we having a disconnect with our filing community, and just make it easier for them to choose when they're submitting their eFile envelope.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love that data is helping to reinforce this sense of customer service and making sure your partners in justice, the attorney community, pro bono, whoever it may be, has a good experience so that you can maintain a really strong partnership for the benefit of the entire justice community. So this is really great. Okay, I think maybe the most important question to those who are not currently measuring data and who are looking at building up a data program in relation to eFile analytics is, how did you encourage buy-in for using data to make decisions among court staff? Are there strategies that were specifically effective in building a culture of data-driven decision-making that you can share?
I can go ahead and start on this one. As some of you may have guessed based on the answer to my previous question, really enjoying working with data. It won't surprise you that my very first job at the trial court, which was almost a decade ago, was as the first data analyst in our municipal city court system. And I had to work really hard every single day to get people to trust the data and buy in, and see the benefit and really believe in using data to make decisions. So generally, beyond what the data is sort of related to, I found that it's really just about meeting people where they are at when it comes to data. It's frequently scary. You know, a lot of folks in the court system are attorneys, they're judges. They are not folks who have an aptitude or a comfort level with data, especially when that's coming at them in the form of an Excel spreadsheet or, you know, a complex visualization. That's really tough. So I always found it really useful to engage with folks and learn maybe what their comfort level was and also what their interests were. What committees were they sitting on? What were they working on research-wise? What could I help them with? And starting really, really simple, and then kind of increasing in complexity and kind of holding their hand the whole way through. That built trust, and it really, I think, allowed them to show up to some of these meetings and committees and wave around some data. And then other people in those groups would say, wow, that's really great. I love hearing about that. Where did you get that? And then my name would get passed around. And, you know, wouldn't I know that half of that committee now wants to talk to me about specific data points, or could I help them track something down or measure something? So I think, you know, that was 10 years ago. We're now at a place, I'm really happy to say, in Massachusetts, where people come to expect data. If I make a decision about a project or initiative and someone, you know, has questions about it, one of their first questions is usually, what data did you use to land here? How are we going to support this with data? And I love that because I usually have that data ready to go. But I think that we've worked really hard to engage across the trial court. We have a whole department related to data, and then kind of individual departments also use their own data. And we've worked really hard to make it easy to consume and accessible. And we hold, you know, routine trainings and engagements and have groups across the trial court which focus on data. And I think that that's really built a culture that comes to respect data and also really look for it when decisions are being made across kind of every policy, every jurisdiction. It's just something we use now and everyone's expecting it.
That's excellent.
I would definitely echo Caitlin's theme on that. We are right on the edge of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area and just growing. And so we've used the data to help with gut checks. You know, like we talked earlier, you have this instinct that something's not right. Or even like Caitlin was saying, of people saying, hey, it's taking too long. But when you actually get the data, it tells a different story. And so it's really helped to confirm we think there's a trend here, or to say, actually, no, we don't have a problem. It's not as bad. And because we're growing so fast, it's really helped to get other offices to understand where the needs are in the courts of, do we need more courts? Do we need more personnel? And to not just always be going off of a narrative or just that gut feeling, that you actually have something to support what your story is.
That's excellent. And I'm glad to see that this culture of data-driven decision-making is really becoming more and more prevalent in each of your jurisdictions as you have access to data that you can trust and that you can easily share and help others visualize. To Caitlin's point, Excel spreadsheets are really intimidating. My husband is a math teacher, and I still get a little bit nervous when he starts talking about different calculations. And so I think there's a little bit of fear around like percentages and really understanding them. So everything that you're doing to help your office and your county leadership or state leadership understand how this information will just empower them to make stronger decisions is so interesting. And it's just going to benefit the justice system so much. So with that, I would love to open this up to questions from the audience. I know we already have a few. I'm going to give everyone a moment to add some more questions. And while you're doing that, there are 2 slides I want to share before we jump into those questions. And the first is this white paper. So I would love to invite you to explore Tyler's white paper called The Evolution of an Advanced Court. It covers everything from analytics to AI. And offers valuable insights as you assess and plan your jurisdiction's path to advanced technology. So it's a fantastic resource to help you make informed decisions on your technology adoption journey. Again, this is not intended to be salesy. It's truly a almost product agnostic piece of a document that you can use just to learn more about the technology space and what's out there. Another thing I want to share is my contact information. So if there are any questions that we don't have an opportunity to cover today, or you want more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, whether you're a Tyler client or not. Connecting with those of you who dedicate yourselves to this concept of justice for all is honestly one of the most rewarding parts of my role. And I always, always, always want to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can open up the questions. And I think to stop sharing my screen, I actually need to go to a different screen on my computer. It's a little bit of a messy setup.
Thanks, Stevie. And we're at 1:59, but we can still take a few minutes to talk because we were going to have a call after this, but we have a couple minutes, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those who are able to join. And again, if we're not able to answer these, we can respond in a typed answer and make sure that gets shared out. So I think the first question is from Scott Graves. Are rejection reasons provided in an open text field or a list of discrete values? And if it's the open text, how do you analyze this data, especially if the volume is high? So I'll let either one of you take that. I think it differs from agency to agency.
Yeah.
Ours are discrete values.
Ours are open text, which with a volume like a statewide court system, as Scott kind of hinted here, when the volume is high, that makes it really tough. And we usually can, we can narrow it, we can filter it very easily, but it has caused us to think about changing how we enter rejections and how we code that so that it is much easier to analyze when we are looking at, hundreds of thousands of cases or envelopes worth of information.
Yeah, I think we often, as you start to analyze the data, you find that some of your historical business processes just aren't accommodating to having this data-driven culture, and you have to shift. And that's sometimes very difficult. Sometimes it's a little bit easier, like maybe it's going to make it a more efficient process to have that drop down anyway. So thank you for that. One of our next questions is, how do you receive the data and how often? And what happens when you do not receive the data? And I can take that question. So this application that they're using is directly connected to their e-filing manager. So if they have everything that they're doing to process their documents is being shared with this data platform. And we have it set up right now to update every 24 hours. So usually around midnight, 1 a.m., the data is refreshed. So it's not quite real-time data, but it's a lot better than using data points that are stale, maybe 12 months old, 18 months old, or those that are really static reports that expire almost as soon as they're run because the data is changing. So can this tool be used to search e-filings for information that may not have been previously coded? I believe the answer is yes. And Meryl, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about this offline. I think there are a couple of ways to think about this, and it might be helpful to get some additional context from you. So if you don't mind shooting me an email, or if you don't mind, Nick, and sharing your contact information, I'd be happy to talk that through. And then I think 2 more questions. One is, what system do you use to analyze the data? And I'll just say that both courts are using a Tyler product called eFile Analytics. It is directly connected to their eFile and Serve system, which is the EFM or e-filing manager that is offered by Tyler. Both of these are part of statewide implementations. So for example, the entire state of Texas has access to this tool, as is the same for the Massachusetts trial courts in particular. And then the final question, and I think it's a broader question, more about using e-filing, and I'd love for Caitlin and Sharina to answer, and it's for non-attorney filers. Why should I e-file? This is from someone who normally represents landlord-tenant cases.
I'll take the first crack at it just from our perspective. And I think it really depends on geographically what your state is set up for. For Massachusetts, depending on kind of where you're located, you can file landlord-tenant cases in a couple of different courts. And what we found for non-attorney filers is that this is just a much easier system to file with because you don't have to physically appear. You can submit it all online. If you have a different job, you don't have to take time off of that job to come into court, meet the court hours. Court hours are usually the same as other business hours. So if you're working, if you're trying to arrange for childcare, for us, those are some really big selling points. It just is so much more convenient. And again, depending on what your documents and your filings look like, I personally think that it's a quicker process to e-file if you're familiar with the system, and I don't think it takes very long time to become familiar. It's pretty intuitive. So that's kind of what we usually will give when we talk about a sales pitch for why e-filing is beneficial, particularly for non-attorney filers.
We encourage non-attorney filers to use it because they don't miss things. So in Texas, there's the option that's called File and Serve, and essentially, like what Caitlin said, like a TurboTax, walk you through, ask certain questions, and it completes your form. Even if you don't use that, as you go through the e-filing process, you know that you're catching any filing fees. If there's any other optional services you want to add on, like service of process or things like that. And then at the end, the filer is making sure that they get a copy to all of the other parties in the case. And they don't have to now go actually physically mail a copy or somehow get that to them. And once the court accepts it, they know everything is filed. Self-represented litigants can still bring in their paper and bring it to the counter to file in Texas. But sometimes we see that they don't always have everything that they need. And so what that happens by them e-filing, they're not missing any steps, and they know that everything makes it to the final step to be submitted to the clerk for acceptance.
Yeah, those are both great reasons to utilize this tool, and I hope it allows you to expand this idea of justice for all, because then you don't have to physically go into the courthouse, which saves time and money. So thank you all very, very much for joining us today. I think there may be a little bit additional information from NACA.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank you all for sharing your information and joining us today and answering some great questions from our audience. I do have a couple slides about NACM that I'd like to share, and it's going to take me a minute to get it to cooperate. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to ask for confirmation that it shows the slideshow that I'm looking for. We good? Okay. Just a few quick slides to share. I won't go through all of them since we ran a little bit over, but we did want to thank you for joining us, and we want to thank Stevie, Sharina, and Caitlin for providing their information to our membership. NACM has a lot of great benefits to membership to our association. You can get continuing education opportunities, access to webinars. Of course, these are open, but you can also have more access to good information. My favorite thing about it is networking, to be able to meet people from across the country doing similar or different things. And then a part near and dear to my heart is our publications, because I serve as a co-chair of the communications committee. And so, and I'm current editor of the Court Manager, which is a quarterly publication. And then we also have our kind of email blast for Court Express with kind of smarter or shorter articles about different things. And then we have our guides, which are great resources to courts on a variety of topics. We also offer the Core Champion certification, which is a great opportunity to get focused information on different topics and then kind of go through a program to be certified as a Core Champion. Lots of mentoring opportunities or ability to receive a mentor if you're earlier in your profession. You have access to ICM courses and of course conferences, and we have reduced conference fees for members. This is one of the several webinars that we did this year. We worked really hard to provide great quality, up-to-date information for our membership. Our next one coming up later this month on the 25th is Courting AI, an AI guide for courts. It was just published this year, and it's been really receiving great reviews. These are some of the other guides that we provided this year. The Court Security Guide and Courting AI Guide both came out this year in addition to the Court in Practice. A great point is to encourage anyone to join our committees. That is how I became involved in NACM. You can join any of these calls by going to our website and clicking on the committees tab, and the meeting information and links are right in there for you to access. They're a no pressure. You're not going to get like jumped on to do great projects. They really just let you get to know people in the association. It's a great way to kind of dip your toe in and get to know people who are behind the scenes of NACM. And then we hope to see everybody at our mid-year conference, which is coming up in Atlantic City. And that's in February. And then our annual conference over the summer will be in Omaha. So that will be a great time to get to know your fellow members. We have started in the last couple of years to have a great social media presence, so we hope everyone can join us and follow us. We have the QR codes here, but you can just look it up on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.